What's up, everybody? I'm the Sonoran Desert Grower with news that you can use. Today, I found this article from the World Bank. It's a Q&A with Jürgen Bogle on food security. I haven't read it yet, but I like reading stuff from different kinds of places and sources. So let's see what this dude has to say. Question: Even before the war in Ukraine, food insecurity was rising. What were the pre-existing drivers, and how do the current increases in food price increase hunger? Answer: Hunger has been rising for a number of years, well before the Ukraine crisis and well before COVID. The number of hungry people was already about 800 million in 2020, around 100 million more than the year before. This is partly because of the COVID-19 pandemic, but it is also because of the long-standing drivers of food insecurity such as conflicts, extreme weather events, and pests and diseases. Conflicts are a big driver of acute food insecurity. Acute food insecurity is horrible because it really puts people at immediate risk. A staggering 388 million people across 42 countries experienced acute food insecurity in 2021, which is more than 5% higher than in 2020. So this is an issue we need to focus on right away. These numbers are depressing. Like, I had no idea it was 800 million people. A lot of people. Which products are particularly affected by the war in Ukraine? Commodities most affected by the conflict are wheat, to some extent maize, edible oils, and fertilizers. Wheat is the primary commodity affected by the war. Russia is the world's largest exporter of wheat, accounting for 18%, nearly 20% of global exports in 2021, while Ukraine accounts for a further 10%. They're not the largest producers of wheat, that's India and China, but they are the largest exporters. About 35% of the world's population relies on wheat as a primary staple in their diets, so it's a very significant shock. So all the gluten-free people are winning, all the keto people are winning right now. Y'all ain't gonna feel this. About a week ago, the price of wheat on global markets was about 50% higher than in February and about 80% higher than a year ago. Maize prices also increased following the invasion, rising 25 or 30% above the February levels and about 37% year on year. Other commodities such as rice are not affected for the moment, which is quite different from the situation we had 14, 15 years ago during the last food price crisis. So there is a little bit of good news there. With shipping through the Black Sea at a standstill and high global wheat prices, we can expect other countries to sell more wheat since stock levels are not bad, or to plant more wheat this spring and summer to make up for the shortfall if exports remained blocked. So the world is not facing a global wheat shortage overall. There is enough wheat on the planet. But the problem is the countries that we're used to importing from Russia and Ukraine need to adjust. It will not be painless and it will be very costly. The impact of the war on fertilizer costs and availability is also significant because it could translate into production problems for the next season across crops. If yields crash because farmers cannot access or afford fertilizer, Russia and Belarus account for 20% of global fertilizer exports. Fertilizer prices were already very high before the war because of high oil prices. The price of urea already tripling last year. So organic farmers are winning. Organic farmers are winning. They're not going to feel this either. We don't even participate in this market. Which countries and regions are most likely to be affected? Countries with high wheat imports from Ukraine or Russia are at highest immediate risk, especially those that were still awaiting shipments for the second half of the year, such as Egypt, Turkey, Bangladesh, and Iran, but also Lebanon, Tunisia, Yemen, Libya, and Pakistan. It's the countries in the region, Middle East and North Africa, MENA, Countries depend on wheat from the Black Sea region for geographic reasons. The ships only have to cross the Mediterranean, and wheat is a staple in that region's diets. This also threatens humanitarian operations in MENA since the World Food Program depends on this wheat. So the compounding shock of the war in Ukraine may cause severe outcomes for vulnerable people in several countries if humanitarian and development assistance are not scaled up. Again and again, whenever we have a crisis, it is the poor who suffer the most. We've seen some countries respond with export restrictions. Is that an effective strategy? This is exactly the wrong thing to do. It's critical we have a conversation around how to keep the trade of food commodities open. If you want to support your own population, do it in a different way, but do not block the flow of food. It is tempting to restrict export to avoid local shortages, but it has very, very detrimental implications, as we saw when we went through the 2007-2008 food price crisis. The trick is really to move food from place of surplus to place of need, and trade is crucial for that. What's interesting is that the food supply has become so globalized that if you do put export restrictions, it is going to have a detrimental effect somewhere in the world where that food is typically exported to. So I see what they're saying. We don't have a very strong local food system. Most of the big farms are exporting. So what should governments and the international community do to support those most at risk of food insecurity? Countries, of course, need to act and react and put measures in place. In general, it's better to protect the purchasing power of the poorest households through well-targeted nutrition-sensitive social protection programs rather than maintaining prices artificially low for everyone. For instance, subsidizing bread across income levels is not only very expensive for government, it's regressive. It encourages food waste and poor diets, and it can be very hard to repeal politically once crisis is over. So supporting safety nets at a time of crisis is the right way to go. The same caution applies to helping farmers access fertilizer. The knee-jerk reaction is to subsidize because fertilizer has become more expensive. But if subsidies are applied indiscriminately, it risks increasing demand and fertilizer prices worldwide, and it doesn't help in the end. Removing input trade barriers, focusing on more efficient use of fertilizers, investing in biofertilizers, and repurposing public policies and expenditures to better support farmers are much better ways of doing this. In addition to avoiding export restrictions, what do you domestically what you do domestically is very important. We now know from a couple of decades of experience what works, what has beneficial effect overall, and what doesn't work and should be avoided in a situation like this. So nowhere in there, minus the whole biofertilizer thing, was there talk about organic farming, maybe, maybe just maybe making some compost and ditching all this synthetic fertilizers and healing the soil. And a lot of people are like, it can't be done at scale, and it can be done at scale, but the problem is you need to hire people that know what they're doing. You can't just hire like just anybody to run an organic farm, and that's the problem. People don't want to invest in people. What can countries do to strengthen food security and improve their resilience to such shocks? It is very important that we don't just focus on the immediate crisis and short-term measures. Every country going forward needs to continue to transform its food system and make it more resilient in the long term. It's really crucial to stay that course. Food systems were already reeling from multiple crises prior to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Governments, private businesses, and international partners need to work towards more productive, resource efficient, diverse, and nutritious production systems to ensure food and nutrition security is there in the face of rising climate conflict and economic risks. We can't keep our eye off the medium to long term. Public spending on agriculture is in the order of $750 billion a year. and a lot of that money is not helping. It needs to be redirected in a way that actually achieves those more resilient, more nutritious and less climate damaging outcomes. Mobilizing private funding and investing in innovation and research and development will be key because everyone needs to do more with less, produce more nutritious, more diverse, and more high value food for a growing population, and do so with less water and less fertilizer, while limiting land use change and greenhouse gas emissions. Climate smart agriculture is the word to remember here. Research suggests that investing in stronger food systems is also an investment in peace. This must be clear to everyone. If food systems are wobbly like they are in many countries right now, it leads to conflict, it leads to migration. So I think honestly, like, why can't we have a program where we encourage people to grow a portion of their food at home? Um, why can't that exist? Uh, there's just so many answers to food insecurity. There's so many technologies that exist for high yield of nutritious and clean food that is has a very light footprint on the planet. For example, aquaponic systems. You can grow fish and plants, and the inputs are very minimal, and it doesn't use a lot of water, right? It doesn't use a lot of fertilizer. So there's answers to these problems, but the problem is that this is a business, right? So the only answers that are going to be sought after are the ones that are good for business. Have countries reached out to the World Bank Group for help, and what kind of support is being offered in the area of food security? Yes, definitely. We've been in touch with a number of countries, and demands are ramping up. Since the beginning of the pandemic, we responded with a whole set of emergency financing and new projects, and we expect to do more with this additional shock. In the last 2 years, the World Bank has provided about 17 billion annually in combined IDA/IBRD lending. This is up from 12 billion on average in the previous 3 years, primarily for agriculture and social protection measures. In the last couple of years, we've allocated about $500 million across 11 countries from the crisis response window. There will be a lot more coming. Let's be clear. This is not the last crisis we will be facing. So whatever we need to immediately help those who are in acute need, but we should never take our eyes off the much deeper and much more fundamental issues that we need to address through our support and our programs. All right. So, um, this doesn't really instill a lot of confidence that the food system is going to hold up to next whatever the next crisis is going to be. So I am definitely happy I have the skills to produce the majority of the food that I need. I can raise some chickens and I can harvest them. We're already doing that. Like that is good. Um, I have a rather large vegetable garden that yields hundreds of pounds of fresh produce every year and is very fulfilling, right? It's very nice to go out into your yard and harvest crops that you can turn into dinner and just very nutritious meals, and it makes a huge difference in your life, or at least in my life, right? So that's why we're encouraged y'all to do is get your gardens up, get them on point, because who knows what the future has in store for us. And this is a huge international institution, and they are not going to do the programs that are actually going to end world hunger, right? Because the only way to do it is small farms that are resilient and they're producing um, food that is bioregionally adapted, right? Like everyone has heirloom um, crops and native foods that they can tap into that will, use less resources and less fertilizer. Organic farming, you make your own fertilizer. You're not uh gonna be affected by a war anywhere because you're making the compost on site, and you do have to buy minerals, but these are not um you can grow alfalfa. You can grow a bunch of alfalfa and make your own alfalfa meal. And so there's ways that you can be um sustainable with it. The reality is that compost and work castings is going to cover most of it, and the mineral inputs are very minimal, and they're also very specific and targeted, right? Because one field might be low in nitrogen, so you can throw in some alfalfa in there. Another field might be low in phosphorus, you could throw some bone meal in there, and you can make a lot of these things yourself if you have the resources to do it, right? Like I make my own bone meal with the bones from our chickens, and it's very easy to do. We just we compost everything, and after a couple years in the compost, the bones get very brittle, and you can powderize them in a Vitamix, no problem. So, um, small scale is the answer. That's pretty much what it comes down to, right? Calcium, you need calcium, you can powderize some eggs, right? Make an eggshell powder, um, which I've done in the past, and it works amazing. So I don't know. This article is not that great in my opinion. It's definitely like on a high level in terms of business, and they're talking about national economies and on that level, right? So it's going to be all synthetic. It's going to be all um based on unsustainable practices. So there will be crisis. There will be crisis. There will be supply shortages. So to me, my walkaway is stay on top of my garden, stay on top of my garden, stay on top of my chicken harvesting, um, because it's not gonna get better. I think it's gonna get worse. And we'll see what 2022 is gonna play out, and we'll see how 2023 plays out. If you like this video, please consider subscribing. Check out my Patreon at www.patreon.com/the Sonoran Desert Grower. I have tons of exclusive video tutorials and articles on there. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.